You're listening to Saunders County Online. I'm Callie Johnson as we are traveling through this early May. Can you believe that it is supposedly springtime? Today I have a special guest. It is Congressman Don Bacon has joined us today. And I wanted to get to know him a little bit more because at this point in time, we have an election coming up, and it's actually pretty big for Saunders County because there's actually a lot of changes that will take place after the election. So thank you for taking a little time and speaking with us today.
Well, thank you, Kelly, for having me on. I want to point out I've been here to Saunders County now 26 times since the lines are redrawn, and so I've spent a lot of time out in Saunders County. I love being out in Wahoo, where I'm at today, but thanks for having me on.
Certainly. So speaking of traveling out to Saunders County, Wahoo, surrounding area, let's just dive right into it. Now, I'm going to come back. We're going to talk a little bit more about you, but what do you see when you drive west of Omaha, west of Highway 6, west of Elkhorn? What do you see?
Well, there's definitely more production agriculture focus. You got feeder lots, obviously a lot of corn and soybeans as well. I'm on the ag committee, and a lot of folks, mistake the fact that, in the previous district, a lot of them think we didn't have farms. We did have some farms, North Douglas, some out in Western Douglas, a lot out in Western Sarpy County, but we were more agribusiness in the old district. Still very ag intensive, don't get me wrong. You have commodity businesses, you have transportation, the banking is very ag focused. So even if it's not direct, there's a lot of indirect agriculture focus. But also, it's great to have a larger production ag focus with Saunders County added in. And this was I grew up. I grew up on a farm, corn and soybeans and beef cattle. And I like being on the ag committee. I'm on the Armed Services Committee as well. But I find that my portfolio and working this is going to fit very well with Saunders County because this is, maybe not largely corn and soybean, maybe feeder lot. We also have an ethanol focus and a lot of other areas. They're all ag oriented.
And so let's go back to that. Then you come from a small community in Illinois, correct? And so you grew up on a farm,
right?
So farming, about how many acres did you farm?
We had about 1,000 acres, and it was mainly corn and soybeans. We had some, maybe 50 to 70 cattle, depending on time frame. But I lived on that farm until I was 21 years old, besides going to college, but I was always home for the summer. I worked the farm, and my dad made me work a second job at night, when I was home. So, being a busboy or working at Subway, did those kind of jobs too. But at 21, I joined the Air Force, and I enjoyed going back home. The farm's still in the family, and it's a treat to be home. But I did 30 years in the Air Force, and we found our home to be Sarpy County by the time we were done, and we moved out here. Had 16 assignments in the Air Force, and we thought Eastern Nebraska was the best of all.
Yep, ended up at Offutt Air Force Base.
Correct.
So yeah, that definitely creates. That's actually what brought me to Nebraska. But thank you for your service, by the way.
Well, I enjoyed 98% of it.
Well, of course, yeah. There's always that 2%. That's just like any position. So there's that 2% you have to get through. So when you look at that, moving forward, taking that experience into play. And then seeing the landscape of Saunders County being very much ag industry. And then, obviously, Omaha is still, the economy is ag driven. People don't realize that as much.
Agribusiness. And if it's not directly agribusiness, it's indirectly agribusiness. Like the largest bank says its number one lending is to ag businesses or farms, ranchers. So in the end, the whole Nebraska economy revolves around agriculture. Right.
And so with that, though, you can see how you can kind of really help focus on the ag industry. But now we have Saunders County being blended into the 2nd district after the election and after everything goes in next year. So how do you feel with, for example, there's a population difference. So how do you feel you can make sure that every segment is well represented?
Well, we try our best. Most folks who know me know I do like 6, 7, 8 events a day when I'm back home. Typically, when I'm in D.C., it's 4 days out of the 7. Then I'm back here for those 3 days. And then you only do that for 3 weeks, so you get a 4th week where you're back home. But when I'm home, I do try to take Sundays down as much as I can for family, but it's we work hard to get all over the district and give it our very best. The district itself, we had to lose 45,000 people in the redistricting. So we were at 45,000, too many people. So La Vista was taken out, and most of Papillion. By the way, that's my hometown.
Right.
So I sort of hurt.
Yeah.
In Papillion, about a half mile north of me is the line.
Okay.
And so it was, Papillions were, it's a heavy veteran influence there. So that was on the downside. But on the positive side, gaining Saunders County really is back to my roots in a lot of ways. I grew up in a town of 1,800, but actually it was 5 miles outside of that, right? I was on a gravel road on that farm, and the closest town was Momence, Illinois, and then I lived in a county called Kankakee. When I look at Wahoo, it reminds me of Momence, Illinois. It's about the same size and just the same personality, if you will. The district itself, though, didn't change politically. It started out before the change, 37% Republican, 36% Democrat. The rest are non-aligned or independent.
Right.
Now we're 37% Republican, 36% Democrat. Yeah. It didn't change when you look at the demographics of the party. But from my vantage point, I knew that I had to get out here to Wahoo, but all of Saunders County. So 75% of the county may be Republican, but if they don't know you, and I want to make sure I'm being as accessible as I can. The other day we did 10 events. I think 8 of them were in Saunders County. So we are trying our very best to introduce ourselves.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the diversity there. You have 36% Democrat, 37% Republican, and the rest is, well, whatever they choose at that moment. How do you represent and speak with individuals? Because obviously there's going to be somebody that's opposing what you're feeling.
Right.
So how do you work through that?
Well, you can't please everyone on every issue. I try to be very honest about where my views are. And so I run very candidly, and I try to fulfill my promises. And so, like we have right now, you can't be pro-life and pro-choice at the same time, right? That's just a fact of life. But there are some things we can do to be more bipartisan. And so I do strive to look across the aisle, find where we have consensus areas, and try to. And if you can't get 100% on a bill because you don't have enough Democrat support, maybe you can get 50% because you get enough support. 50% is better than demanding 100% and getting zero.
Right.
And that's been more sort of my mantra since about 2018. I got elected in 2016. I finally figured out Congress, you got to build consensus to be effective. And out of that, there's a survey done by Georgetown. It's also called the Lugar Index. I was rated the 15th out of 435 for bipartisanship last year. The new rankings came out today. I don't know what it is yet. But I was rated 15 out of 435 last year or 2 years ago. Then there's another group called the Common Ground Committee. I was rated the number 1 elected official in America that will work across the aisle and find consensus. I don't believe in compromising my values. I'm pro-life. I love our Bill of Rights. I believe in the free market system. But that doesn't stop me from trying to work across the aisle to figure out, okay, how can we do a little better to secure the border where we can find agreement? How can we, if I can get some consensus areas, it's better to hit some singles and doubles than trying to hit home runs and striking out. And so I've learned, just keep moving the ball down the field, make progress.
Well, and I think part of that is that, and many people are so self-focused that they're not realizing that we need to work to find a consensus that works for as many people as possible. Does that create an issue for you?
It does. Some people get angry because they want 100%, but 100% and getting zero is still an F, if you ask me, right? So we have a lot of folks who are purists, and I'm a purist conservative, but if I can agree with a Democratic colleague on 50% of an issue, let's pass that 50%, because that means we're getting something done on the border, or that's getting something done on healthcare. We got to make healthcare more affordable, and so and that's what James Madison, that's how he designed the system. I read the Federalist Papers. I'm a political theorist. I mean, it was a hobby of mine. I love our political history. Those history and political stuff's been a hobby since I was in junior high. Right. And so James Madison designed a system that one party, and they didn't call them parties at the time, they didn't have them, but he helped develop the first party after the Federalist Papers. But he designed it so that a faction could not dominate Congress or dominate our country. That was going to mandate a consensus between different factions. That's why they built a bicameral. That's why they gave minority rights in the Senate. That's why they built checks and balances and the separation of powers. So somehow in our country, we've developed a culture that compromise is totally bad. You got to, it's like some of my colleagues have this, these words, we're going to burn down the house. Well, I don't want the house burnt down. I have kids and grandkids. I want our house to be working well. I want our country to be working well. But our system was developed to force consensus to get things done. We've lost sight of that.
Yeah, have you seen, now you've been serving since 2016.
I got elected at 16 and January 3rd of 17.
Is
right.
when you started. So, but if you take a look back in your history, we like to look at political history, past, I would say 50 years. What would you say is the biggest change?
Well, there's been multiple changes. It used to be, prior to 1994, it was a one-party led in Congress since 1952. So one of the changes is now Republicans and Democrats compete fairly evenly in Congress. I think there's some good sides of that. I like the fact that the conservatives have a chance of winning Congress and having a bigger voice, but it has created more partisan passions, no doubt there. Another change, and this is not for the better, Congress used to have a bigger say 50 years ago, but because of the partisanship and the fact that Congress, when I say Congress, I mean the House and the Senate together, can't come together, it's left a void that the executive branch has filled and the judicial branch. So you'll see that over 50 years, the executive branch and the judicial branch has grown in strength, and the congressional or the legislative branch has atrophied. I don't think that's healthy. But the reason for that is you have a legislative branch that is unwilling to find consensus. They're demanding 100%. You can't get 100% with a filibuster in the Senate. It's just a fact of life. And so again, we got to get back to a culture where you're hitting singles and doubles. If we're doing that, the legislative branch will grow in its voice again and be an equal branch to the executive and the legislative.
And would you say, actually, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. So how would you approach the size of government? Let's say, for example, the executive branch has grown to a point where there's more power there. Overall, we're looking at federal reach. Is there an overreach, or how do we correct that, or is that fine?
No, it's the federal government has overstepped its bounds, and Congress is part of the problem. I'll give you an example. We pass health bills, and it should be, for example, shouldn't Congress decide if we have Title 42 or not? Instead, the president could just do it on executive order. Why is that? Because Congress says in certain health emergencies, we give the president these various authorities. We saw this happen in Omaha, too, recently, when the city council gives authorities to a health official, and then that health official makes a decision that the city council disagrees with. I think we got to preserve those authorities at the congressional level. I think and we've given away a lot of those authorities to the executive branch. I'm a supporter of the balanced budget amendment. Nebraska has the balanced budget. It has forced the governor and the unicameral to make tough decisions, and they have a balanced budget. The fact that we don't have one in Washington, it's just too easy to pass on deficits. And you see what we have. We're running over $1 trillion deficit a year right now, which is, I think, ridiculous. It's repugnant to the Midwest, and it should be. So I think the balanced budget amendment is useful. I think, too, if we had things like single subject voting like we have in the unicameral, where you can only vote on one bill at a time.
Right.
What we see in Congress is they group two strong bills that people like and throw in a weaker bill, and they dare you to vote no. Well, I don't think that's good governance. And maybe just in principle, I think Article 1 of the Constitution, Section 8, lays out what are the roles of the Congress. We've surely exceeded that. We need to go back to Article 1, Section 8. And we've got to remember the 10th Amendment leaves powers to the states. If it's not expressly written in the Constitution, that power belongs in the states, and I embrace that. But to answer your question, the federal government is kind of too big for its britches.
And so we
need to put it on a diet.
Figure out how to be able to pull that back. And is that
something? It'll be incremental, though. Again, we didn't get here overnight. It'll probably take a while to get us back down to size.
Well, is it something that if we don't start taking action on it and pulling it back and putting it on a diet, so to speak, that it could crash?
Well, I worry about a $30 trillion deficit. It exceeds our annual GDP, which is a red flag. And I wish that the budget deficit was the highest priority, but it's right now it's not with the voters. I mean, if you look at polling, the deficit ranks 8th, 9th, or 10th. And so therefore there's not this pressure for many of the elected officials. But I'm a patriot. I love our country, and it's about doing the right thing. So we need more people speaking up on this. $1 trillion plus a year it's not right. So a lot of people realize that, Kelly, I voted against $9 trillion in new spending in the last 15 months. $9 trillion.
$9 trillion. That's a lot of money.
In our budget was, like under President Trump until COVID hit, was about $4.5 trillion a year.
Yeah.
I voted against $9 trillion in a year and a half.
Yeah.
And part of it is that the COVID was sort of we did need to spend more money when we shut down businesses. There was some reasons, but we way overdid it. This last bill was $1.9 trillion voted on party line, totally party line vote. Even Democratic economists said if you do this, it's going to trigger inflation. Larry Summers, who worked for Clinton, worked for Obama, said don't do it. You're going to have high inflation. Well, what do we have today? The worst inflation in 41 years. And it was a mistake, that bill.
And that, I'm just curious if any of that leads into kind of a situation we're dealing with across the country. But here, it's hard to find good employees or people wanting to work because of various factors. Does any of that fall into that, do you think?
Well, that's one of the top 4 issues in Nebraska right now. It depends where you're at. It could be the number 1 issue, right? That's one of the 4 issues I hear the most is workforce. So we have an unemployment at 2% or under. We have,
which is amazing, but
it's best in the history of our state and in the country. Our workforce participation could be better. We need to hopefully we get more people back to work. I think a lot of 2-parent families with COVID went down to 1-parent working families, and that's their right. They're free to do so. But we do need more workers. Half the businesses out there are looking for employers that they can't find. They would want to grow if they had the workers to do it. And an area that I find critically important in Nebraska is we need to expand the trades. We have a shortage of electricians, welders, plumbers, pipe fitters, truck drivers. These are high-paying jobs. So we do have a large number of folks who are underemployed. If there's businesses out there, I go to a lot of them. I went to a Caterpillar plant recently. If you'd like working on Caterpillar vehicles, they will pay you to go to, and they'll pay for your training, get you your license, your certificate, and you get a great paying job right out of school. There are so many opportunities in Nebraska right now for that. If I was a high school kid today, the sky's the limit for what's being offered. If you have a work ethic and you have character, there are great jobs out there for kids coming out of high school.
Well, and that kind of comes into another question, not necessarily that that's where I was going to go, but when it comes to high school and having trades, more trade schools available in high school where kids, when they graduate, they are ready to go into the workforce, not necessarily having to go to college, or they've already had their college experience and graduate at the same time.
A lot of times they're still going to try to put you through a year or 2 years of training, even if you had some good training in high school. But if you could go to high school and get that training up front, right away do I like woodworking? Right. Do I like electrician work? And so forth. Right now, Sarpy County I went to 2 schools recently, 2 schools in Papillion. They have a tremendous trades program. It's one of the best I've ever seen, both schools there. I hope other schools look at it because that is a prototype. And they have over 200 students right now every semester going through the trades. And some of it's putting up drywall, some of it's mechanics, some of it's welding. I mean, I could go out. I mean, all the various trades, and the businesses are in there recruiting people. They got out of high school. They say, "We'll finish your training if you come to our business," and then they're getting $50,000 a year type jobs for starting pay with wealth insurance.
Right.
And so this, if I was at the governor level or unicameral level, this would be one of my top priorities right now. If I was running a school board, I'd be making this a top priority for the local school. Now, the question is, what do we do in Congress? I want to help incentivize the trades in our schools, but frankly, schools are more of a local, getting back to your earlier point, where's the role of federal government in this? But I sure like to be on my bully pulpit trying to encourage the local school boards and states to push this, because it's a win-win.
Well, I think there may be a relationship in the fact that there is a lot of conversation about student loan debt and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So seems like that has become the federal government looking at that instead of local.
Right.
So,
What's the president trying to
Right.
think he just write off someone's debt, which I don't know where that's constitutional there, but that should be another decision made by Congress and the president. I mean, that's how we pass laws on there. But I do think the trades is an area that we could really elevate the performance of our local schools. And I've seen it where some schools are taking that leap and they're doing a great job.
And so, so I mean, like you said, that is a local, that is a state level issue,
Right.
not something for Congress. But again, it is guidance comes from Congress on a lot of things, doesn't it?
Right. Well, there is a lot of money that comes into Congress and it goes back to the schools, and there's always a temptation to try to incentivize. Hey, we want more money spent on trades. We can have that dialogue, but I'm very cautious about. I'm a federalist at heart. There's different roles for the federal government versus the state and local governments, and I do want to protect that. But I just think at the local level, I would be making trades a top priority.
All right. And let's say you get elected and you become the Saunders County representative as well as the rest of the district. But again, I'm focusing on Saunders County. So what, just kind of at this point in time, what is the statement you want to leave the county with?
Well, more broadly, and I'll come more in a bore site than on Saunders.
Yeah.
I want to ensure that we have peace through strength. I want to defend our freedoms. We have real threats in the world, so I probably one of the foremost experts on national security in Congress with 30 years in the Air Force and 5 commands. I also want to ensure that America is the most competitive nation in the world economically and in trade. That's very important for Saunders County. We're an export area, and there's some more fundamental issues. I'm pro-life. I want to defend the family. So those are my core values. But for Saunders County, I'm on the Agriculture Committee. I'll be able to work on the Farm Bill. I know crop insurance. Affordable crop insurance is a top priority for many farmers here. I know trade is very important, whether it's corn, soybeans, or beef or pork, right? We produce a lot more than we can eat, and we produce it at a price nobody can compete with. So those are some areas right there. It was my initiative to get the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank stood up. Important for our livestock industry and our grain industry because they provide for the livestock. And I've been one of the large proponents for more research on like African swine fever. So I have a good voice in the Ag Committee that I think impacts Saunders County. Now, also we have Camp Ashland. I helped restore the base after the floods. I was the lead in the Armed Services Committee for that. Also restored off at Air Force Base. They're not there yet, but the money's there. We just it takes a while to rebuild all of that. So, but I think the 2 committees I'm on are a good fit for this district, whether it's national security or ag, and I look forward to being the biggest voice I can. I'll be a ranking member or a chairman next year on the Armed Services Committee. I look forward to that.
All right. Well, thank you again for coming in, and I look forward to in more conversations because,
thank you.
Again, opening up and making sure that we communicate is a huge issue right here.
Thank you. Appreciate the time, Kelly.